a little bit, it's mutated a little bit. And there are cases, new cases that are popping up in different areas of the world. There's some new cases in the UK, there's been new cases in New York. I'm not too worried about the actual infection that may arise from BA2. So I still, because we're at the end of March, I said that most likely, I said this months ago, most likely at the end of March, we're gonna have we're gonna be moving into the endemic phase. And that we're gonna move towards a little bit of normality. But but the caveat is, there's two caveats. Normality doesn't necessarily mean going back to a pre-COVID-19 epoch, right? The government is still going to use the event and events that are happening in Ukraine to keep pressure on the society, not just in the United States, but also in a lot of Western countries, Western civilized countries, such as the UK, such as, the Australia, Canada, United States, Germany, France, Italy, So, but I'm more focused on the United States, obviously, because I'm from the United States. But it's this Biopatriot Act and the elements of it, where you have surveillance technologies, you have a push for vaccines. It seems like the mandates are going away, but they could ramp up if there is a breakout. And endemics, by definition, are breakouts, but they're not pandemics, like what we just went through. So we may have HHS or the federal government push for mandates. Hopefully there's going to be enough pushback saying no, and that they're push for these mandates for some new variant that pops up. Maybe it's BA2, but BA3 or BA10 or whatever it is. Or as I said on Mike Adams' show months ago, V12, some version 12 comes out, and then all of a sudden, we start seeing a lot of these problems that I've been talking about with Hoskins effect and potentially the release of the fourth or fifth cocktail and all the complications that are in that, independent of what's going on in Ukraine. Ukraine adds to another level of complexity. But the point I'm making here is that in the endemic phase, we could still have breakouts, but they're not going to be as severe. The reason being is that there's a lot of natural infection antibodies that have been produced, which are broad spectrum and longer lasting. But there's an awful lot of individuals around the world that has antibodies through inoculation. So because of that, it's a different dynamic than what we had at the very beginning, when there was no antibodies and all we had was monoclonal antibodies that was like from Regeneron or some of these other monoclonal companies. But with that said, there's still going to be a push for tyranny by the governments, free land, from Canada, the finance minister in Canada, using governmental means to suppress protests by cutting off financing. In essence, sanctioning their own people. Just like how at the global level, we're sanctioning Putin and the oligarchs and trying to stop the war in Ukraine. There was a sanctioning and is a sanctioning inside countries of the citizens by the government because they don't like what you're saying. And those sanctioning, it can be through cutting you off on YouTube or cutting you off on Twitter or preventing you from getting donations from PayPal. At the more severe cases, losing the ability to do transactions with MasterCard and Visa. So these are other levels of sanctioning it's an element of the Biopatriot Act. It's that social scoring pillar where if you don't meet a certain if you don't have a certain mentality that is governmental mainstream kind of stuff, then you can be quote sanctioned. That has always been an element of the Biopatriot Act. So we have to worry about the Biopatriot Act even though the pandemic is ending. So long story short, I said several months ago that I think that the end of March would be when I call the pandemic over for the United States. That doesn't mean the pandemic is going to be over at that time for other countries. Some countries are ahead of us in terms of the United States, and some countries are behind. So there's going to be this little bit of a zone of time before everybody in the world will be more into the endemic phase and out of the pandemic phase. But for the United States, we're at the end of March, and since I called the crisis for the United States, back in January 25th of 2020, an existential threat, and I stated that on multiple channels, including Doug Hagman's, and was proven right. So I think that I have some street cred to state that we're getting out of the pandemic phase, but we are going to be in a endemic phase for the rest of our lives, for the rest of your children's life. And most likely what will happen is this thing will attenuate. But I have a feeling that nature has a way to morph independent of new releases, and that we may actually see a natural phenomena take place 10 years from now that may scare us into a new pandemic. Another caveat is that if the fourth or fifth cocktail is released, then some of these dynamics that I've been talking about with AIDS-like syndrome and the Hoskins effect and all this stuff may reignite a new pandemic. And this leads to what we need to learn about with the shadows of Hiroshima. Okay, so the history of the H-bomb. The history of the H-bomb was developed by the Manhattan Project. It was in the United States. Some of the people that are listening to the channel already know this. Some people may not. So I'm going to just do a brief cliff note. During World War II, Nazis were getting close to being able to build a nuclear bomb. Top researchers contacted, I'm not sure if it was Fermi or if it was, it wasn't Fermi. It was maybe Oppenheimer. Oppenheimer, I think, contacted Einstein. Now, Einstein was the famous, scientist, E equals MC squared, right? So he was a theoretical physicist. But all these other individuals, like Oppenheimer, they were more experimentalists. They knew how to build stuff, right? Einstein wasn't more of a builder. He was more of a theoretical guy. All right, so you have theoretical physicists and you have experimentalists. All right. So Oppenheimer, I believe, was the one that contacted Einstein about what was going on with some research that was taking place in Germany. This is during the war, World War II, so Nazi Germany was getting closer to purifying, I believe it was uranium. And by purifying the uranium, it would lead to a chain reaction, an uncontrolled chain reaction, which would release tons of energy. Now, it ties into Einstein, because Einstein was saying with very little mass, you can have a lot of energy. And by having this chain reaction, it could unleash lots of energy, an ultimate bomb, right? Understanding what that really meant in terms of radiation and all, and we didn't know at the time. So Einstein writes a letter to Roosevelt stating that the United States needs to get involved in a research project to beat the Germans with a nuclear bomb. Well, Einstein writes this letter to Roosevelt. Roosevelt reads it, and eventually what happens is that it builds up the Manhattan Project. All right. Fast forward after the research that took place, and there was two lines of research. They didn't know how really which way to go. One beat the other process to get the uranium out of the rocks and to purify it and all this. And that's a very intensive process. So they built a city, and they had their own, out in the desert, and and this is Los Alamos type, stuff early on and all this. So they build the bomb. So it was called Fat Man and I believe Little Boy. I think Fat Man was the one that dropped on Hiroshima, and Little Boy was the one that was dropped on Nagasaki. The Nazis lose the war before the United States had a working bomb. And, depending on historians, and I'd probably fall in this category, many historians believe that the Japanese would have lost anyways, even if we didn't use the bomb, and the idea that you have to use the bomb on Japan to win the war probably was a falsehood, and it was more of to see how it would really work in a theater, a world theater. I lean towards that idea that the dropping of the two bombs probably didn't need to happen. The thing is that without dropping the bombs, we wouldn't have learned with such a low yield. You gotta remember that these bombs were very rudimentary because they were the earliest ones ever made by mankind that we know of. So these were lower yield compared to what we have now. By not dropping the bomb, we wouldn't have known the radiation effects. We wouldn't have understood the cancers that might arise. We wouldn't have understood the blast dynamics. We wouldn't have understood in full detail the movement of the radiation with the trade winds. There's a lot that was learned, unfortunately, by dropping the bomb on Japan. That doesn't mean that it should have been dropped. I don't think it should have been dropped. I'm against weapons of mass destruction. I'm against weapons that, nuclear, chemical, and biological. I'm even against nuclear power for energy because it's not clean. I'd rather use coal, even though, it was certain filters and new plant design, you can have cleaner coal burning plants. You still have particulates. Now, the particulates from coal burning back in the 1800s is no way near, what we have today. We have much smaller particulates when we're burning coal. So, but the thing is that when you're done with the plant, it's easy to disassemble. When you're, even whatever environmental damage that takes place from coal burning can rectify itself over time, right? In a short amount of time. But when you're talking about nuclear power, those plants can't be disassembled. They're a wasteland forever. Well, maybe not ever, but it's like at least 1,000 years. A lot of this waste material, because once they spin the fuel rods, and the water, they have to put them in special containers. And normally, they keep them on site. So you have material, radioactive material, that will be radioactive for 20,000 years. So when people say, and you're hearing the news, We need more nuclear power plants. Even Elon Musk said this, saying that we need nuclear power because it's clean energy and that it'll give us an abundance of energy. But the thing is that there is a price to pay for the Hiroshima was Little Boy. I thought it was Fat Man. It was Hiroshima. But okay, but either way. But all right, so but the price to pay after the plant is retired, usually they run for about 50 years. They've been pushing it beyond the 50-year mark, but they're usually designed for 50 years. So the point here is that you have this waste material that'll last for 20,000 years. So which is cleaner, coal or natural gas, or nuclear, right? And I am proposing that nuclear energy is not clean. Nuclear, and I think that most people that have common sense would agree with me. But if you listen to CSIS or the Hoover Institute or a lot of these think tanks, foreign affairs discussions, they're pushing that nuclear power is clean. Right, yeah, right. So now, so there's the benefit of making nuclear power for a lot of energy, but the cleanup, and if there is an accident with a coal plant isn't as bad as an accident with a Fukushima plant, or a Chernobyl plant, or a 3 Mile Island plant. These are areas that are devastated for 1,000 years or more. So it doesn't make sense to have nuclear power, but you need nuclear power plants to make nuclear weapons. You need nuclear power plants to feed the military industrial complex, all right? Now, it is true that some fissionable material can be used in satellites and in jet propulsion systems and electronics in space for long distant travel, especially in satellites. You know, these satellites, they can get some of their energy from solar, but as they move beyond the solar system, they're going to need some sort of nuclear power to keep this system running, right? And when you have radiation pulsing at a certain rate and you have shielded it properly, you can use this as a energy source. So having nuclear power for space exploration makes sense, but it is not cost effective unless you have plants all over the place. So there's, now I am for fusion reactions, which is much different than fission reactions. So fission reactions are like splitting, right? That's and the products that are split are radioactive, and there's a runaway process, especially if the carbon filters don't stop some of the electrons, all right? If the plant goes down, well, it loses power for some reason, in a fission reaction, it will continue to go. In a fusion reaction, if power goes down, the whole thing shuts down right away and there's very little radiation. So research going into fusion versus fission, I think makes more sense. So I'm not completely against, quote, nuclear power, but the way we're making the nuclear power is, but you know, science is moving closer and closer to fusion reactions. There was a test that was done, I believe in the UK, where they were able to start it up, and and to control it a little bit. So we're moving in the right direction in terms of fusion instead of fission reactions. But it causes fissionable, the nuclear power that we have today causes a lot of problems. So what can we learn from the shadow of Hiroshima? Well, there are atrocities that can take place that are forced upon, and there are atrocities that take place that emerge, that we didn't know what was going to happen. What do I mean by that? The testing of the bomb in the Nevada desert before the dropping of the bomb in Hiroshima or Nagasaki, they understood the power of that bomb after they tested it. At the time, when they tested it, some scientists on the Manhattan Project thought they would punch a hole through the earth. Well, they didn't punch a hole through the earth, but so there were others that thought that if you explode the bomb, that you would light up and burn out the atmosphere. So, even when they exploded the bomb at the test site, they really didn't understand really what was really going to happen. All right, so they could theorize, but they didn't really know until they did. When they dropped the bomb in Hiroshima, for example, on the thumbnail picture that's on this video, we didn't know that there was going to be shadows that would be permanently casted because of the vaporization of an individual. It happens so fast that it bleaches, the radiation and the blast bleaches the surrounding area of the silhouette, leaving the shadow. No one could have known that at the time. And then the mass destruction in a city, it was never tested in a city until it was dropped in Hiroshima, 400 feet, I believe, above. And how that blast radius twisted metal and blew out buildings and vaporized people, those were all unknowns. Another unknown was this weird syndrome that their skin was starting to fall off. They were here, they were having, issues with their neurological system. They were bleeding profusely. They're hemorrhaging. Radiation sickness. That was unknown. That was another thing that was discovered. These are all things that there were negative externalities that came out of dropping the bomb, and that we should learn from. And that the shadows are whispering to future generations, us now. Back then in 1946, they were whispering to us, those shadows of the children, the people working on their house or whatever, the ladder man. They're whispering to us that we should learn. Same thing with the crane, the 1,000 cranes in Japan. I lived in Japan for a year and a half when I was at Nissan. So, and there's this park, the crane, the 1,000 crane park. And there was this girl, I believe, that ended up getting leukemia because of the bomb. I'm not sure if she was from Hiroshima or from Nagasaki. Maybe she was a Nagasaki victim. But either way, they have a belief that if you, made this garment out of 1,000 cranes, folding, origami, these 1,000 cranes, that you would get a wish or you would heal or something like that. She eventually ends up dying, but there's this park, that's the 1,000 crane park. That's another hint, that's another whisper to future generations about the atrocities that can take place with weapons of mass destruction, not just nuclear. Now, what do we mean by weapons of mass destruction? Well, obviously nuclear, there's chemical, and there's biological, what I call biologics. And we learned a little bit about what was going on in World War I with nerve gas, mustard gas, and and how it was condemned to be used on the battlefield. We know that it was used during the Iraq and Iran conflict. We know it was used in Syria. And its potential reality of being used in Ukraine by the Russians. The reason why nerve gas was used, mustard gas was used in World War I, was because of the stalemate that was going on in the trenches, in the trench warfare. There was such an attrition rate on both sides that they were trying to come up with means to be able to neutralize the enemy, and that those nerve agents and the mustard gas would float and kind of descend into the trench, and cause burning on the skin and the eyes, and get into the respiratory system and burn your respiratory system. So it was an effective weapon to try to neutralize the enemy. And after the war, eventually there was this agreement that certain weapons would not be used. It still, unfortunately, are being used and are being developed. And it's not only the Russians that make chemical warfare, chemical weapons. The United States does it too. So we didn't learn from that episode, and we end up building something even worse, which is nuclear. Now, there was a little bit of, let's say, biological warfare way, hundreds of years ago, maybe even 1,000 years ago, like plague kind of situation where you would take a plague victim and you would catapult them, into a city or, over the wall of a castle, and you would cause havoc. So that was a form of biological warfare back then. They didn't understand germ theory. They didn't know they knew that this person died from something bad, and they knew that if people are in close contact with this individual, then they could get it and die too. So that was kind of the beginnings of biologics. Now, biologics can be put into different buckets. One biologic is viruses. We've covered it multiple times on this show, on this channel. So viruses are one form of biologics. Another form of biologics is bacterial. You can design bacteria to be more lethal. Funguses can also be designed to be more lethal. And parasites can be designed to be more lethal by changing their genome, by giving them added functionality, or weakening the host through loss of function by the environment that they're in, changing their diet, vaccination programs, whatever. There can be a loss of function that leads to more virulence of these biologics that are developed. So it's not just gain of function, but there's gain of function and loss of function capabilities in these programs, in these defense programs. It's not just the United States, it's many different countries. And that, again, we need to learn from the history, the shadow of Hiroshima. Ladder Man. What can we learn from Ladder Man? He's echoing to us, that we are on a path of terminal destruction, as Noam Chomsky describes. I agree with Noam Chomsky on this regard. I don't agree with him on many things, but he's right about the push of continual war, especially by the United States, and that there are going to be negative externalities through this continuation of war and developments of war, systems of war. And that when we hear in the mainstream media that the United States is worried about Russia using chemical or biological weapons, well, the thing is that the United States does the same thing. And we develop and have used this stuff on the battlefield. Case in point, look at Vietnam. That deforestation stuff wasn't just to deforest; it was to depopulate. So the United States has a lot of atrocities it needs to repent. The country can move in the right direction if it admits to its failures and corrects them. Not just admits, but corrects them. So, the problems with WMDs, nuclear, biologic, chemical, is that one, it's a weapon of mass destruction, and that part of that mass destruction isn't just sheer deaths, acute deaths, but there are chronic deaths that happen too. There's the acute death with the initial phase of releasing that weapon system. Obviously, in nuclear, the first blast will kill you, right, and vaporize you. But then you have the chronic, where you have the radiation sickness, that some people die shortly after, 7 days after, 3 days after, or some people may die 15 years later because of cancers and stuff. Same thing with chemical warfare. Chemical warfare can be acute. You can die from it quickly, or you can have chronic illness because of being exposed to chemical weapons. Case in point, I think, what was happening in Iraq 1 and Iraq 2 with some of the soldiers. And especially with the Vietnam vets. So, chemical exposure could hurt that person being exposed to it for years or decades and affect their germline and passing some sort of developmental disorder. A lot of Vietnam vets, they had children that had deformity issues, cleft lip, cleft palate, if they even reached a full term. A lot of them were spontaneously aborted. So there's this long-term effect, not just on the ones that are exposed, but the ones that the future generations. Same thing with biologics, especially with viral. By designing these systems, you can design it where there's an acute kill, and the ones that aren't killed acutely can be affected through chronic means. They have, let's say, MSK problems, musculoskeletal problems, or they have cognitive function problems, or they have cardiac problems, or they have pulmonary problems, and chronic illness. So here again, we need to learn from Ladderman, the shadow of Hiroshima. What we are doing is wrong, and that we need to stop it. And we're so focused on CRT if what sort of color scheme the women should wear during, let's say, the State of the Union address during Trump's administration, where they all wore white for suffrage and all this stuff. That is small potatoes from what I'm talking about. And that was the main reason why I did this show, was to try to express that some of the normal things we're talking about in the media, the normal things that we're even talking about in alternative journalism, if you want to call this alternative journalism, some of this stuff is just not that important that we're talking about. But yet, when we start to elevate the conversation at a philosophical level, all right, that we are doing things that have huge ramifications long term, geopolitically, in terms of statehoods and how domestic policy, the relationship between government and citizens arise, monetary systems in the world, that elevates the conversation. What do we, like, for example, what are we hearing in the kind of like the news cycle right now, besides Ukraine, which is a disaster, and potentially tiptoeing in World War III, and that's part of the reason why I'm doing this video. But the news cycle right now is what happened at the Oscars. Some comedian, Chris Rock, gets slapped by Will Smith. And, most people are saying that Will was at fault. But that's small potatoes compared to what we're talking about here. We are on the verge, in this year most likely, to see a drop in an urban environment of chemical or biological or both in Ukraine. The reason you do it is because of the lessons learned on the battlefield in World War I. If you are put in a high attrition environment where you're in a stalemate, like urban warfare or trench warfare, then you have to use unconventional means. And those unconventional means are chemical and biological. On top of evidence heavily suggesting, like about 6 labs that have these biological programs that I'm talking about. Not just viral, but bacterial, fungal, and parasitic. And I stated, pay attention to waterborne viruses or waterborne diseases, because that kind of research was being worked on with Barrick. Pay attention to ticks. So tick are vectors for diseases. Could be bacterial or viral, especially the Crimean Congo virus. And then pay attention to other hemorrhagic ones like Marburg or Ebola. I don't think Ebola is too good of a weapon system, but we have to pay attention to these things on top of avian flu, swine flu, and some sort of merger of the two with beta coronaviruses, which is what I call the fourth cocktail. These things most likely have a high potentiality of being released in Ukraine because of the stalemate that happens. If Russia can be pushed out quickly, there's no opportunity for Russia to use the biological or chemical means. I think it would be if they're locked into an urban setting and they're not winning, through conventional means, and they'll retreat, move around. So what they would do is, let's say they'll use conventional means around the city. This is, let's say, Kiev, and the forces are moving in and bombarding the city, all right? if they're winning through the bombardment, there's no reason to use chemical or biological. But if they have a high attrition rate as they're moving into the city, they'll do is they'll retreat and then create a border around the city and then drop biologics or chemical and try to clear out the region. And they'll probably do it in sectors, sectors of the city. Now, obviously, the city isn't perfectly round, right? So that would be a sign that if they're retreating and holding a position, then you got to start worrying. But the point is if you push back the Russians quickly, they're not going to have the means to prepare for a chemical or biological drop. This is why it is important to help the Ukrainians push back the Russians onto the Russian border. Get them back in their box. Now, I personally believe that Russia isn't as strong as we think they are, and that there's probably a lot of infighting in terms of their military structure, or it's very disorganized and not well funded and not well maintained, not well trained, and that we overshot the assumption that they were as powerful as they are. And having a no-fly zone that is supported by the Ukrainians, but funded by the United States through Iron Dome type technologies and through more military equipment like airplanes, to have that no-fly zone will take away that spectral dominance of the air that the Russians are trying to project. And that will reduce the chances of Russia extending the war into the western side of Ukraine and focus more on the eastern side of Ukraine. And then the forces of the Ukrainians can keep on pushing eastward and push the Russians back. Now, what happens with Odessa, and maybe it should be carved out, maybe it shouldn't, that's a little bit more of a civil war kind of thing going on with the Ukrainians and the separatist group, which I think is a separate issue than the overall invasion of Russia into Ukraine proper. But if we keep on not realizing that we have to keep the Russians moving in reverse and not have the ability to retreat, regroup, and then use mass destruction, through chemical or biologics. If we don't push them back quickly and take away their ability to reinforce and trench in, then they're going to use these things. So we have to get engaged. The United States has to get engaged. I don't take the stance that we need to be pacifists, but I also realize that the United States has started, or maybe not started, but instigated the situation. Russia has instigated the situation too, but the United States over many decades have instigated the situation, and we need to hold the ones that are making these policies held accountable. But it's going to be far worse for us if Ukraine falls, because now you're talking about in an emboldened Putin moving into Poland, into Hungary. This is very reminiscent of what was going on in World War II. And we're tiptoeing in to World War III by not being engaged. I like the phrase that Chris Hunter said. America needs to show up. We're not showing up. We'll telegraph, we'll help you a little bit, we'll help you there, but we're tiptoeing. We're playing around, we're tiptoeing, and we're not being the world leader that we should be, that my grandfather fought for that my uncles fought for, during World War II. For the ones that have been listening to me, my grandfather was a CB in the Pacific Theater, island hopping, killing Japanese, and made sure that we were able to reach Japan with our bombers. My uncles, one was airborne in the European theater. We also had a bomber pilot in Air Force. But the thing is that we showed up. Now, there were individuals in the United States during World War II that were funding the Nazis early on, and that were afraid to get involved because it would disrupt their money-making machine, aka the Bushes. So, we have to, shed light that the Americans aren't all perfect, and that there were nefarious groups within these conflicts. They go way, before World War II. And we have nefarious actors on the United States side with the Ukraine crisis. But if we do not get engaged, we are going to see WMDs used. It could be tactical nukes, it could be chemical, it could be, it could be biological. Now, the worry is, and I think that it's a reasonable worry, is that if you push back Russia quickly and prevent them from using chemical or biologics in Ukraine, that an unstable leader like potentially Putin that feels threatened domestically and internationally may use technical nukes. So we have to keep that in mind, that strategy increases the risk. So we're using one strategy, push him out quickly to reduce the risks of using chemical or biologics. But if you push him out quickly, you may be increasing the risks of using tactical nukes. But it depends on if the Russians would follow his orders. I think there's enough strife going on in Russia, and there's so much distancing that's been taking place with Putin that I don't think he has a full handle on the country. That's my gut feeling, and because of that, I think the push strategy, quick push strategy, onto the Russians to get them to retreat, and to give Ukraine air superiority, is probably the best policy. But unfortunately, we have people running in the United States, running our foreign policies, or running the executive branch, running our legislative branch, that are, some of them are, they would want they want a war that is extended, because an extended war would mean a lot of money. It would mean another enemy that you can fund the war machine to fight against. I just find it odd that it's not even a year since the retreat from Afghanistan and the debacle that took place. It wasn't even a year before we are on the verge of World War III. Makes you wonder about that. So, so just to remind everybody that anyone that wants to ask a question, go into the description under this video, and there's a Zoom link, and that you can log in to that Zoom meeting and then ask your question, and then I'll answer it. So with this current crisis, That's what we do. We show up. The United States shows up. I did 3 videos on my big channel, and a lot of people are going, "Oh, what does this mean? What do these symbols mean and all this?" Well, I'm trying to inform the public through the censorship certain things that are going on. But other times, I will do something to not just, we're going through a very, how do I want to phrase this? We're going through a very strange period of time. And it is important to document that and express one's opinions, express one's understanding of the situation through one's skill set, but also to take the time to artistically express. So you listen to a lot of these channels, and I know I complain about Dr. Campbell, but he focuses on this very boilerplate kind of style. Well, we have these many cases, and this is the R0 value, and it's very boring. All right, and peak prosperity, it's a little, there's, you notice that it's kind of consultant like. All right, it's not like he's on the battlefield, right? You remember those times in the very beginning, where I woke up, I turned on the recorder, and I started talking, right? So it wasn't planned or anything. I was trying to inform the public in real time. That's being on the battlefield. That's being on the front line. So, but a lot of these individuals that people are listening to with COVID, they haven't taken the time to express the artistic side of this. And through that, you will learn more about humanity, about the bad and the good. And the last video I did was a link to a song that Eddie Vedder released recently. It's called Invincible. And it has a good guitar riff. But the thing is that the video shows hope. The video shows that if America shows up, not just in Ukraine, but if America shows up in terms of space exploration, in terms of actually being and tapping into our ethos of can do, we can do amazing things. But when we listen to the Democratic Party, they want to look down. They don't want to look up to the sky. They don't look up to the sky. They don't want to look at the heavens. They want to look down and, if there's a problem, just write a check. And just, Joe, old man Joe, is going to write you a check if things are bad. He won't tell you how it's paid for, like inflation, but he'll just write you a check. Instead of saying, we don't need to have never-ending enemies to maintain technological prowess. We can open up space with exploration. The amount of technology, the amount of metallurgy, the amount of electronics, the amount of software development, the amount of training for the younger generations to go into school for engineering and medicine and computer science and all this, and manufacturing, that will lead to a major boom in the United States and in the world. And what it will do is it will allow for us to explore. There's no reason why we don't have 100 satellites floating around, not just around the Earth, but floating around every single planet in our solar system, and creating in real time all this telemetry that's collected around their moons. We would have satellites around their moons, satellites around those planets, and you create a grid now. You have 100 I'm not the only one that said this, and Story Musgrave, one of the famous astronauts, said this too, that by now we should have a solar internet, right? And when you have a solar internet, then when you move out farther, you have waste stations to be able to push out even farther. You know, it's time to actually start being the Americans that we are and move out of the 20th century and really move into not a 21st century China, but a 21st century America that is with space exploration. Don't worry about CRT, because CRT and constantly pushing some of these woke agendas will not have us look up. They will always have us look down. And with that, I will take your questions. So please take the description link below this video and click it, and you'll be able to go into Zoom, and I will take your questions. Hey, Chris, how you doing? I can't hear you. I think you're muted. You're muted in Zoom. Okay. Hey, Chris, I can't. Now you're frozen. On my end, you're unmuted, but I can't hear you. And now I can see you. You're moving around now. You probably have too many screens up. So while Chris is figuring that out, please take the link, the Zoom link in the description, and log in. You don't have to have Zoom installed. You'll just click that link and you'll be able to get in. No, I can't hear you, but it is unmuted, so there must be maybe some issue with your mic, or...
Yeah, everything just...
Okay, I hear you. I hear you now.
Everything reset.
Yeah. So how you doing?
I'm doing good, sir. Yourself?
Well, been studying hard.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah.
I don't know if you do it, man.
Well, I don't know how I do it either. But right now we're in going over gynecological cancers and
Yeah, it's gonna be a big problem now.
Say that again?
Aren't cancers gonna be a big problem now?
I think so. I really do. I think that in terms of the infection, in terms of SARS-CoV-2 and then in COVID-19, I think cancers will start to pop up more. And not just that, there are cancers that are popping up more now because people that needed their treatment weren't being treated during the lockdowns. And cancer, especially in stage 4, is pretty serious. And if you don't get your treatments, you have major problems. And a lot of these patients, especially in stage 4, they don't have, I don't want to be too pessimistic, but usually it's less than 24 months.
Yeah, it's hard below there. I know that I, at 40 years old, went into the VA and did colonoscopy. And I had 2 polyps growing in my intestines, and ever since then, every 2 to 3 years, I've been going back and getting 2 more removed. Now I'm at the point where I have to go every year, and I went 2 years because of COVID.
Oh, damn.
And we're like, nope, we'll get you in now.
Yeah. But the thing is, and I think the ones that are listening, it's really important to get your screenings, and that if they do find something, that you make sure that you maintain those screenings.
Well, they said that normally they don't have you come in until you're 45 or 50.
Right.
And that since they came in early, I saved myself.
Right. This is the problem that my aunt had. She did the colonoscopy when she was in her 50s, hated it, and never went back, and ended up having stage 4 cancer in her 70s because she didn't do the follow-up.
Right. And it doesn't run in the family, so I figured I had to do something in the army.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you. I mean, with your age and number of ones that are popping up, I'm sure it's tied to Iraq.
Yeah, carcinogens and
Yeah.
depleted uranium.
Yeah, I'm telling you.
Ever think about that?
And this plays into what I was talking about, the lessons learned from the shadow of Hiroshima. There's these negative things that are popping up that we need to really talk about. I mean, even with Fukushima, there are these thyroid cases of young children having thyroid cancers that are within that 50, 60 mile radius from Fukushima.
Yeah.
But the Japanese aren't willing to talk about it. They just sweep it under the rug.
Yeah. There's a theory out there that was actually detonated thermonuclear device on the fault line to create that. The funny part about that is that, not really funny, but the curious thing about that is that was actually a breeder reactor for plutonium, weapons grade plutonium. So it would match the signature of the device.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. I've always been kind of, probably since the mid 90s, I've been always kind of anti-nuclear.
Oh, totally. Wait, this doesn't make sense. We were using nuclear fission to boil water? That's our best deal?
That's exactly what's happening. Is that it's a high-tech way of boiling water.
Wait, that's what we're doing. It doesn't make sense. It's like, wow.
What pisses me off is the think tanks in DC saying it's clean energy.
Yeah.
And they're marketing it as clean energy. And it's like, that is not clean energy. That's not even close to clean energy. Solar power, I would say, is closer to, clean energy, right? But it doesn't have the power density that we need. But fossil fuels aren't as bad as it's being, marketed by the green dealers, these Green New Dealers. But nuclear is crazy, absolutely crazy. But I do think that cancers are going to start popping up. Now, the thing with cancers is that, one may start to have, hyperplasia, and then it'll eventually lead to, dysplasia. And sometimes it takes years. Other cancers, they're more faster growing. So we may not see the big blip until 5 years from now.
Yeah. Well, I was under the impression that I heard there were more cancer clinics opening up around the United States right now. I can't back that up. I just heard it and I didn't look.
Wait, say again that there are more.
There's a push for cancer clinics to open up around the United States right now.
Wow, I didn't know that. Now that might be though opening up because there's such a backlog because of people not getting treatment because of COVID shutdown,
right? And
that there's the that potential, to get patients,
right?
through. But I'll tell you, I do think though that there's going to be there is a shutdown for some people. There's a shutdown of T cells and B cells that will lead to, if you don't have proper regulation of your T cells and B cells, you're going to end up getting cancers.
Yeah. With the magnetic field dropping and being exposed to more cosmic rays, that's going to up it too.
Right.
I put a link in here to the Sapphire Project. I don't know if you heard of that or not.
No. What is it?
Some guys are messing around with the magnetic field and figured out a way to basically take a plasma field and they are able to fold it on itself like 7 times, and it creates almost a mini sun. And they're able to size it and create more energy than they're using, and they're able to feed it radioactive material and get out raw elements that are not radioactive.
Wow. So they can almost like reverse radiation.
Put a link to it. Yeah, put a link to it in your chat here.
I didn't know this. And this is totally different than just the fusion reactor.
Right.
Wow. I didn't know. But I mean, I've been so busy on learning about gynecology.
How's that going?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, there's a lot of diseases out there. There's a lot of diseases out there.
A friend of mine told me one the other day. I was like, what the hell are you saying?
Yeah, I'll tell you, I have seen stuff that I have nightmares from.
Jack O'Neill, yeah. Yeah, Jack.
Hey, so Jack, do you have a question?
Yeah, Paul, just a quick one. I wondered if you could give us your perspective on what the overarching impetus is to keep Russia out of the Ukraine versus letting them complete their operation versus some sort of a balance of power situation like a Vietnam situation versus an Iraq operation where the U.S. goes in and totally obliterates Russia's command and control. What would be better? Is it better to let them complete it, or why are we keeping them out?
Well, I think that what Putin telegraphed in his papers that he published months ago, and some of them were years ago, about trying to reconstitute the Soviet Union is real. I don't think it's just hitting his chest and trying to be a tough guy. I think he really wants to reconstitute the Soviet Union to some extent. And if that is the case, then that means that NATO, some of the eastern countries in NATO are going to be targets for Putin. And I take the stance that Putin is not just going to go into Ukraine and try to get the separatists, into his sphere. He wants control at least of half of Ukraine, all the way to the main river that bifurcates the country. I think he wants at least half, if not all. So we have to take it in the sense that what he published is what he wants to do, and if that's the case, we can't assume that this is just some sort of small operation. I think there is a more global strategy that he's doing. Yet he's telegraphing currently that it's just an operation. But I think the real strategy is what he's published already, and that is to bring these other countries back into the Soviet sphere. If that takes place, then that's going to automatically kick off Article 5. NATO gets involved, and we have World War III. So my take here is that I think it's better to push him out. Now the question is, do American forces go in and work in conjunction with the Ukrainians, not just in probably black ops, because I think the United States is in Ukraine already. I think we are using special forces right now, and I think it's part of the reason why certain generals are getting picked off. But I don't have any direct proof of that. It's just I have a suspicion that's taking place and helping the Ukrainians. The question is, does the United States, with its conventional army and conventional navy, get involved? Or do we turn this into a Afghanistan of the 80s and bleed Russia dry. I think Russia is way more on the brink of collapse than back in the 80s. I think that there was so much corruption that took place under Putin's leadership that I don't think that the country is that strong. I don't think their economy is the delta between the economies of Russia and the United States is so much. The gap is so much greater now than back in the 80s. They can't compete, even if they want. They are literally 20 or 30 years behind with technological prowess. Yes, they get these one-offs technologies like, hypersonics or something like that. And I think that we're a little bit late to the game. Very similar to their Sputnik moment. But I don't think that they have, I don't think Putin has the will of the people on his side, the far majority. I don't think his military wants to fight it. I mean, the military, let's say, of the 80s in Russia was much more Soviet Union, brainwashed than, let's say, the more internet savvy generation that the Russians are now. I mean, you think about it, the ones that are running those tanks are 19, 20, 21. I mean, they could be our kids, right? So I don't think they have that love for the old Soviet Union like Putin has. So that's another dynamic that I think he underestimated. That I don't think there was a will to fight on the Russian side. So I personally believe that it's best to push him out as fast as possible to reduce the probability of chemical or biologics being dropped by the Russians. But if Putin feels threatened, he may call for tactical nukes to be used. The question is, will the military follow? That's a big question mark. I'm sure that there are systems in place in Russia that could short circuit Putin's call for tactical nukes. So that's my take on it. But you also have you also have kind of like the planners, the war planners in the United States, or the policymakers in the United States. I think that a big reason why they're not getting engaged and showing up on the battlefield more forcefully, or providing air support, is a big part of it is they want to turn Ukraine into a 1980 Afghanistan.
Any thoughts on why Putin waited till now to do this and he didn't do it in 2014? And as well, what would be the impetus for other countries in the region to join back up with Russia?
Well, I mean, I don't think any country in the old Soviet Union would want to join up. I think most of them would say that they would prefer the world that they're living in with democracy versus communism of yesteryear. So I don't think these countries are going to line up and want to be in the bread lines and the vodka lines, like they were in the 80s and 70s. But the Putin wants to force it. Now, why did he stepwise the strategy? Well, by taking Crimea, it controls the Sea of Azov. So that was a tactical move. And he, his policy is basically fund certain regions, create separatists, create instability in a region, and then go on TV and say, oh, you're Russian, I'm going to come in and save you. And the reality of the situation is that he started it. So, he's using dark operations to create havoc in countries, only for him to try to have legitimacy in doing this, incremental move. Now, it is true that the United States and Western allies have projected themselves the last 30 years since the fall of the Berlin Wall through the expansion of NATO. I think that was a tactical, well, not just tactical, it was a huge strategic issue, huge strategic blunder. And that we would not have the Putin today if we held the promise, verbal promise, with Gorbachev that we would not expand NATO. And I don't think NATO should have been expanded. But the thing is at that time, there wasn't really a European Union. There was a pseudo-European Union, that was with certain trade agreements, but the European Union didn't really constitute itself until much later, and it's still weak as a federal government. It definitely doesn't have any military component like the United States has in terms of from a federal level. So NATO has been basically the proxy for a European Union force. Now, if the European Union can get their act together and fund their own military, then I see this as a potential move away from ramping down NATO. If the European Union has their own forces, there should be no reason to be in NATO, to have NATO. So, but I think that the policymakers are out there would say, well, then you're going to lose U.S. Hegemonic projection in the European theater, and we got to have never-ending instability. I said it on a couple shows ago that if we had peace on Earth, the United States would find an alien to have war with.
Yeah, so, the politics of hate. If you can keep hate alive and keep projecting.
Right, but the thing is, that's the wrong way to look at it. You have Lockheed Martin and Boeing and Raytheon and all the defense contractors out there. They're saying that if we don't have a war, if you're not giving us an order for billions of bullets, then we're going to go out of business. Well, that's the wrong thinking. The idea, do they have great technology that they can expand and project and all this? Yes, but it doesn't have to be in war. It can be for peace too. I'm not talking about military machinery. I'm talking about space exploration. I'm talking about, why does Lockheed Martin not move their operations? If we can, I know this sounds a little kind of philosophical and a little bit too maybe Gandhi-ish, but the thing is that if we can de-escalate the wars that are on our horizon with China and Russia, we could move our resources and expand big markets, the space market, and probably even the ocean market. The ocean's unexplored, basically. So, if we create new markets for these companies that are making these, awesome technologies, these awesome systems, then you're going to open up a whole new genre of investment, space exploration, colonization. The amount of money that is needed, the amount of resources that have to be had, the amount of technologies that have to be invented, and the number of engineers and explorers and all these things that have to be ramped up for, let's say, a colonization on Mars or the moon is phenomenal. That alone, if we had a president that said, I'm going to start the colonization on Mars, or I'm going to start the colonization on the moon. Why? Because the future of mankind is going to have to learn on how to get out of this solar system, because our sun is eventually going to die. and there's nothing stopping it. So, and not only that, humans want to explore. So to be able to jump to these other planets or moons, we have to get people more involved in science, more involved in technology, more involved in research and development. And we can turn our war machine towards that endeavor. So that's my take on it. But do we have problems? In the real world at this moment in time, we have a bad actor. We have many bad actors. Putin is a bad actor in going into Ukraine, but he was poked by NATO. Now, so we're at fault, and some of the other Western countries are at fault in pushing Putin into this. But Putin also wanted to do this, and Putin's corrupt. But there's also corruption on the U.S. side. So let's call a spade a spade. So, but the thing is that if we can neutralize this, and that there is somewhat of a regime change in Russia, I still think that Putin's going to get assassinated. But the thing is if there's a regime change and real democracy does flourish in Russia, and the United States embraces that instead of having a puppet government, and allows for real economic growth to be had there, then we won't have to worry about a European theater, and we can focus on the Asian theater. We have to, as U.S. citizens, even though I'm saying on this video, peace and let's explore, space, we have to stop the panda and prevent them from taking Taiwan. And if it means full-blown war, I think that's what we need. So on one hand, I'm saying we have to push Putin quickly and fund Ukraine, and hopefully there's regime change or decapitation, in Russia. But I think more forceful military operations in the Pacific theater, because we cannot have a 21st century China, because a 21st century China is the antithesis of what I'm saying about the future of America, the future of exploration, the future of self-determination and of exploration. See, under a communist, system like China, that we are going to, if they become the 21st century, they control and command the 21st century, we are going to be kowtowing to them literally for 150 years. That's un-American, and I'd rather go full, full Will Smith on them than full Will Smith on the panda than to allow for a 21st century China. But if we can the point is that if you can neutralize the problem that we're having with Putin and neutralize the problem that we're having with President Xi, then we can move and switch and expand the pie, the economic pie, by space exploration and invention. But if we have to do full, Will Smith, we'll have to. So that's my take on it, Jack.
I wonder, Paul. I look at what is Putin's motivation. I mean, why is he pushing so hard? Well, I think that he sees the potential of the Soviet Union possibly being pushed into a Chinese 21st century.
Mm-hmm.
I would expect he doesn't like that, the prospect of that. And with what you're saying, if we can shift the focus from regional conflict into a focus for one humanity into the future, we have a lot of things, power, energy, you name it. We've got a lot.
Mankind,
problems, right?
yeah, Jack. Mankind, from a scientific endeavor point of view, is on the cusp of major discovery. Not just in metallurgy, but in all fields of science, including biology. We are on the verge of adding if adding 100 years to our life. But we also have actors out there, they're trying to kill us and take away that and make us die earlier, and our life expectancy is only 40. So, but the thing is that if we had, if we really embrace this, of what I'm seeing with the advancements in technologies, we don't have to embrace transhumanism. We don't have to embrace totalitarianism. We can the America, the idea of those 50 stars on the backdrop of a blue square is the sky. The future of America is exploration. The future of America is going into the unknown. And there's no flag on the earth that could say that has that same meaning, that has that same ethos. So, my take is that with Putin, there was so much corruption through the kind of like the exit of Yeltsin.
Right, yeah.
That he's built up a house of cards over the last 20 years that's starting to unravel. And that that he feels as though if he doesn't make his move and do a Stalin, then he's going to be cooked by his own people. He's going to be put on the stake and burned alive. If they understood how deep the corruption was, and that some of the economic failures in the last 25 years that have taken place is because of what he has done personally. Russia could have been a lot farther ahead economically and been more integrated into the world's economy if it wasn't for Putin and the oligarchs taking the state assets, through crony capitalism. And we have crony capitalism in the United States too. But the thing is that I think that he's running away because he knows that the house of cards are about to fall, and that he's in a panic mode, and that he's trying to establish kind of like a new Stalinism. So I
interject a little bit.
yeah, go ahead.
I also think that Biolab in Kazakhstan was an eye opener for him and motivated him to get on going, get the other biolabs in Ukraine.
It could have been a catalyst, but I think that he would have done it anyways. I mean,
I think
it may have
too.
sped up the reaction, but I think that based on what he published, trying to reconstitute the Soviet Union under his tenure, was independent of finding about those labs. I think it was
that was the trigger for this one.
Yeah. It probably is. I would agree that it was a catalyst, but I still think that he would have.
Yeah.
And not only that, he's 69 years old. He's almost 70, and there's some reports that he's not, doing too well with his health. So he might, he may have gotten some word that he has Parkinson's, or his doctor said that he has some sort of neurological problem, and that he's sped things up.
Yeah, could have timetable. Yeah. But I don't think there was a better time for him to do it. Being him.
Yeah,
If I was him, I'm just
he
saying.
hinted about this, even in the early days of COVID, that that this was going to cause some sort of instability to some international relations instability that would lead potentially into conflict. This was early on. This was back him saying this in 2020. So I'm sure ones out there can find the video on YouTube, but he did mention this, that there was some sort of instability. And the thing is that's another lesson learned from the shadow of Hiroshima. Is that things happen, and they potentially spin out of control. There's a chaotic emergence that takes place, right? And what mainstream media says, oh, it's just COVID and it's just a virus and it was from a bat and blah, 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 and we all know what the real deal is. But, the thing is that they're not paying attention that the virus, COVID-19, can cause a chaotic attraction in international affairs. And what Fauci was doing, it may lead to World War III. And then, a lot of these people on MSNBC would just laugh. Oh, Dr. Paul, what are you saying? Fauci made World War III? And they don't fully understand the emergence of chaotic systems.
The best way to remold a society is to destroy it first. Pick up the pieces and mold it how you want it.
Right. But that would put us back hundreds of years away from, on the cusp of this great discovery that I sense is we're rapidly emerging to. Because I'm older, most students in medical school, they would, they're in their mid-20s, right? They finish undergrad and they go right into medical school. So they don't really have a true life arc of experience when they're in medical school. But because I'm older and I've seen this, if I followed the normal route into medical school, I would have been, and at the point I'm at right now, like second year, I would have been in medical school at the same position in 1996, pre-genomic revolution. All right, so and a lot has happened since 1996, right? So
Yes.
but the thing is that as I'm learning, because I see the arc, this history, and what I'm learning in medical school, and all of the research that I've done for my master's, I'm telling you, we are on the cusp of some major discoveries. And some of those discoveries are already found in the lab. It's just that they have to be tweaked and they have to be funded for it to go mainstream. So some of this stuff is already there. It just has to be. It's. I'm telling you, we're like, what the way we are now with our life. Teleport yourself back to those early days of, let's say, Henry Ford working in his garage making the Model T. All right, that's what I'm talking about here. We're what is going on right now in the labs is like that day of Henry Ford, and it didn't, and huge changes happened after the car industry. It changed the landscape of America. And mobility and the changing and the creation of suburbs, and it changed the whole dynamic. This same thing that I'm talking about is going to happen, where this new, some of these discoveries will go mainstream, and exploration will start to increase, and we're going to look to now and say, wow, we were really archaic. Like, for example, we are moving towards Star Trek. We don't even realize it. We're moving towards, there's going to be a point in time that there's going to be medicine like what Dr. McCoy did in Star Trek. With his tricorder and all, and all this stuff, I'm telling you, we're moving towards that. Even though, the blood machine from, was it Thalamus or, debacle, to try to detect cancers.
Right.
That was a fraud. But the thing is that the research now has gotten to a point where that certain tags in the blood can be seen to detect cancers.
Through your eye.
Oh, through your eye too? I didn't know that. But
Your eye can tell you all sorts of stuff going on.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. So but the thing is that we're moving towards a point where you take a drop of blood, and not only do you have your genome, you have your epigenetics, you have you're at that moment in time, the blood smear, your differentials, your CBC differentials, but you'll be able to get markers for certain types of diseases, especially cancers. that's where we're at now in the laboratory. It's not ready for prime time, but
Right.
with the proper investment and time, we're going to end up having Star Trek medicine. You know, and then you add in AI,
Yeah,
helping with diagnostics.
well, Apple is trying to, they're moving to take over the health industry as far as diagnostics, to where between wearables and implants, to be able to monitor you all the time to take care of your medical needs.
Right, right. So, what is happening now in for internal medicine and for family medicine, there's a big push to start integrating artificial intelligence into the practice when you're evaluating the patient to help with the diagnostics to reduce errors.
Yeah.
So I'm going to be probably, assuming that I get through medical school, being, in my 50s. But, medical school is hard, man. And doing it when you're 50s is not an easy road. But the thing is that, I will be that crop of doctors that are starting to implement in their practice artificial intelligence to help with treating disease. And that will be tied with precision medicine. And, to sequence a genome is under $1,000 now. Well, once it goes down to 100, I mean, you're not only are you sequencing your genome, you're sequencing all the genomes in a particular biopsy. Because people that don't know this, but diseases, especially certain tissues, they morph and they'll have a mutated genome than, let's say, your baseline genome. And depending on that, depends on what kind of treatment you should go down. Well, you add in precision medicine and artificial intelligence, and you're moving towards this Star Trek medicine that I'm talking about. And for me, that practicing of medicine is just a few years away. I mean, it's already there. It's just it's been built. It's it's beta tested, and then over time it's going to get improved. So, and then you have all these telemetry devices that Apple's coming out with, or Eco. Eco is another company that has this telemetry for the heart.
Spintronics.
Yeah, when you have this telemetry, you're going to be able to do a lot of stuff. Now the thing is, the knife is double-edged, right? We got to make sure that our privacy is protected. See, it is true that we're on the cusp of this major discovery, major extension of life, major movement of markets, widening of markets. But under the wrong hands, you're talking about, Huxley kind of stuff, and that a brave new world. And that's just why it's so important that the Chinese do not win. It's China loses, US wins. Because if China wins with this cusp that we're at with technology, we're going to have a very different world. And it's not going to be of exploration, but of control.
They have a 5-minute, 26-second video on spintronics and how they've used quantum physics to create miniature devices in your bloodstream that monitors all the stuff like you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And they're powered by your body.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I'm just awed, absolutely awed about where we're at in medicine, but I also have the wisdom to realize that there's a lot of unknown. And there's still a lot of things need to be discovered and proven out. But I'll tell you, if we are lucky and we don't blow up this world, and go into a dark age, which is possible, it's happened before. But as long as we don't go into a dark age, and we have the right governmental systems in place of democracy and of representative government, true representative government, then I think that what I'm explaining is going to be our future. But there's going to be growing pains. It's not going to be completely an easy road, but there's some roadblocks, and I see a major roadblock as the 21st century China. I know it sounds very Americana, to say that, but we cannot allow for China as a legitimate government to show that they are more superior economically to the United States. Because what will happen is that there will be factions within the United States that will want to remodel our government towards the communist model in China.
Oh, totally, yeah.
And that's the reason why. The panda must die, period. But the thing is, we don't have politicians that get up on stage and say, vote for me because the panda needs to die. We Kudlow on Fox, he keeps on saying, a Reagan phrase, and that is, we win, you lose. That's the kind of mentality we need to have. We win, right, meaning the United States wins, and China loses. And it gets in line with a true democracy of its people, and some sort of inner reflection of what happened at Tiananmen Square, and have real, true representation in China. Right. But the panda needs to die. Yeah. We need people in the United States government that is more Reagan-esque, and that realizes that the future is just over the horizon for us. It's not that far away, and as long as we have determination and a will, that American will. It's something that was a big lesson for me, as a kid, coming from Detroit. Is you just have to work hard and just pursue, and just keep on moving forward. It's a very industrial, kind of mentality, engineering, industrial kind of mentality. But another thing is also what I saw with the players on the field, watching the football games at Harvard. Harvard's football team, loses a lot. But the thing is that, especially against Yale. But the thing is that they'll fight on the field and fight and fight and fight. The lesson learned here is put it all on the field, because when the game is over, you don't have any regrets. And I think that's where America's at right now. We got to get more people on the field and get engaged. Right, exactly. And the thing is that we have a society now so worried about, worrying about hurting your feelings, making sure your pronouns are correct, and making sure that, there's so many bigger problems that are going on right now that I really don't care about, this wokeism or CRT stuff. Yep. That is, and a lot of it is trying to brainwash the kids. Like, for example, 100%. I'm sure all three of us, in Zoom right now are, older, but the thing is that when you look at these kids that are, let's say, autistic, or, that have gender fluidity, I'll tell you, I never saw this in the 80s or 70s. Where the hell did this start? And I think it's the environment. It's partially psychological because of these social systems that we're on.
Have you read the Kissinger report?
No, but I read a lot of his books.
Oh my God, it tells it all in there. It's the multi-pronged, multi-faceted destruction of society for the elimination of the population. And that's where the women's rights, gay and lesbian stuff started being promoted in San Francisco. The carcinogens in your food, the starvation wars, all that kind of stuff. It was all in the report on how to depopulate the planet.
Mm-hmm. Well,
They,
the thing is like we just had a session, clinical session, in medical school today, and we were talking about how to approach the LGBTQ plus community as patients, and some of their specific needs. Because some of them are going into, gender reassignment and taking certain, medication for gender reassignment and all this, right? So, androgens and whatnot. So, and then, they're training us, to be cognizant of certain things and kind of like check our biases. I think it's easier for a younger generation doctor in training to accept some of these things than, let's say, an older one, because it's something that is more odd to an older
100%.
Physician in training, because it wasn't in my circle of experience,
Right.
ever, and it wasn't like I was,
If it was, that person kept it personal, like we all keep our personal life personal.
Yeah, but I mean, I'm telling you, this gender fluidity thing, I think there seems to be a psychological operational component to it. You look at these individuals and they don't look healthy. They look like they're having some sort of endocrine issue.
Yep.
So I didn't know anyone that fell in that bucket, of just the way they look. When you look at someone, when you're trained to look at someone, you can kind of tell if they have a certain disease or not, right?
Yep.
And I'm not perfect about it, but I'm picking up on some cues when I look at someone. And I'll tell you, when I see some of these ones that are falling into this category, a lot of them start looking like they have thyroid problems, or or obese issues. Their BMI is higher than it should be. Their endocrine system is out of whack. They just, I'm not sure if they're psychologically, they potentially been damaged, some way, somewhat, how, and during their development. I'm not sure, but the thing is that something is not right. I mean, if this was a common thing, and that they're just, because of modern society's zeitgeist, that they're coming out of the closet, then why didn't we see in the 70s and 80s similar physical characteristics that we're seeing now?
That's true.
These physical characteristics were not there in the 80s and the 70s. And any doctor that's saying they're not paying attention, because all you have to do is roll back the Polaroids and look at people, and they don't look that way. But every Tom, Dick, and Harry now, and Susie and Jessica, are they have that there is that LGBTQ plus look of some sort of endocrine disruption. Now, I mean, I think Alex Jones would say it's in the water, or it's in the food, and maybe he's right. But there's something not right. I'm telling you, there's something not right. But the thing is that you're training us that it's biological, that we have to be, understanding. And I understand that you have to be that way because you're afraid of being sued, and you want to make sure you maintain your malpractice insurance and be able to bill out through the insurance companies. So they're pushing doctors to think and be a certain way. But I don't think there's enough research being done out there that's explaining why there's such a difference between 2020s and, let's say, the 1980s. Because something is not right.
You're totally right. Something's not right at all. Have you seen your new intro?
Yeah.
I put a little.
Wait. Yeah, I saw that on Twitter.
I put Kennedy in front of it speaking.
Wait, did you do a version 2?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't see version 2. I only saw version 1.
I think you'll like it.
Okay, I'll see it. I'll take
Maybe,
it.
I don't know.
I'll take a look.
It seemed like you're really busy and stuff, and I saw it.
I'll
and
tell
like,
you,
I would like that.
I'm, I wish I could do more of these kinds of talks and these videos, but it's getting crunch time in medical school, and it's just, there's just more and more medical exams to take, and, this semester is heavy on the clinic side, so you have to remember how to do certain procedures, how to do certain things during the physical examination. So, it's a challenge, because it's not only you're learning book knowledge, but you also have to learn the kinematics.
Yeah.
I'm literally, I feel like I'm being sort of reborn, because I'm learning a new language, medical language. I'm learning moving, thinking in a medical way. It's kind of like just totally being reborn.
It's one of the best ways for a male, a middle-aged male, to keep his mind sharp and useful is to learn a new language in the middle ages, 45-ish.
Yeah. Well, I'm a little bit past 45.
No, it's okay. 42, 50, 52, that's okay.
Okay. Well, I turned 50. I
I
turned 50 in July, so.
Young whippersnapper.
Yeah, but I'll tell you, I think I'm the oldest. I think I'm the oldest one on campus, and the thing is sometimes my professors are actually younger than I am. Sometimes, not usually. It's just once in a while though that the professor is younger than I am. So, but I don't know. What's your take on everything, Jack?
My take on what, Paul?
What's your take on the panda bear?
I'm sorry, it broke up. The take on what?
The panda bear, the President Xi.
Oh, well, I spent quite a bit, I won't say quite a bit of time, but I've spent time in China. I have some friends who were involved with the Tiananmen Square, with the Junka thing. And then I almost married a lady whose family was very high up in the CCP. I was quite shocked and a little bit skeptical of some of the things that they told me. It's been 20 years ago, warnings about what was going to happen. The people that I encountered who were in the CCP were very much, they came out of the old Deng era. They were very much, I guess you could call progressive communists. They were by no means capitalists, but they wanted to see China implement a Western-style democracy, and they had quite a bit of love and admiration for the West. And some of these people who were quite high up in the Chinese military, who I encountered, and government, warned of what we're experiencing now would happen. And it was ushered in under Jiang Zemin and some of his following cronies. I do believe, Paul, that that what we're seeing now, this push for China, is an outgrowth of what Soros and the forerunners to this World Economic Forum pushed for and said that they would accomplish 10, 15 years ago or more. I don't know if you can find one of those. I've got it here archived, but there's an interview with Soros from, I think it was around 2002 or 3, where he explains the impetus for removing the dollar as the world's reserve currency first, then the U.S. as the global dominating power, replacing it with China and a Middle East-centered banking system and a new currency, and that's what would bring around world peace. Once you remove the U.S. And this post-World War II dichotomy. And along with that, I also would suspect that, he didn't mention this specifically, but part of that would also be removing Russia as a world power and replacing it with a globalist power, with China at the seat of it. That's what I'm very concerned about, And this is the concern that also goes back, that I have going back to China, or going back to Russia. If the regime is removed and in a vacuum, what would most likely swoop in there? Well, I think you're going to see China and a globalist regime, this totalitarian regime. That's what they're counting on with the destabilization of Russia. My guess would be that that's who you're going to see move into Russia and take power. And when you look here in the U.S., we have this that could move into Russia or assume as a, these are more globalists. These are more of the same people. So
yeah, I mean, in terms of if Putin gets pushed out or killed or whatever, how would the vacuum be filled? It could go two ways, I think. One, it would be either some sort of military individual that takes control, which is highly probable,
yes.
Or we actually see some sort of an emergence of a democracy, and I'm hoping for the latter, and not the former. My gut feeling is that because if the true corruption actually gets the light of day of what really happened the last 25 years or so with Putin, then if that shows the light of day, then I think that the people of Russia will actually, because you got to remember, the hardcore Soviet types are dying out, and it's a new generation, that wants to be integrated in the world. That's part of the internet. They see how other countries live, and they want that. And because of that, I think that there's going to be an emergent property where true democracy actually flourishes. But we have to see that green shoot, and we have to help it along without Jeffrey Sachs doing shock therapy and some sort of Washington consensus coming in and disrupting it, thinking that they're just going to put a puppet. But to actually let the Russian people have their own real democracy, and once that takes hold, then you can start doing some sort of economic deals. They're in need of a lot of things, so we can export a lot of stuff, and in return they have natural resources that we need. So it's a win-win to help them along, and through that we can de-escalate and bring down the nuclear arsenals. And then when you have that partner, the Russian people as a partner, then that's easier for us to chop the head off of the panda.
Well, and that's what, and we know that the current regime in China understands that, where you say that, well, there are indications that Putin, he says he wants to rebuild the Soviet Union. Well, quite definitely what we have in China is a reemergence of Maoist CCP style China.
Right.
As a global dominant power.
Right.
And I don't see them allowing that, and I don't see the regime that we have here in the West and that we have in Europe making any to be inclined at all to facilitate a democratic Russia. If anything, they would probably facilitate throwing the rest of the world into the clutches of China.
Well, I mean, I'm maybe a little bit more optimistic than I should be, but I think that the Russians have seen communism for too long, and because of the internet and a window in the way other Western societies live, with all of its faults too, but they want the blue jeans and the rock and roll, and that's what won the Cold War, and I think that this is the way to win Putinism, is to help the Russian people towards this kind of democratic ideal, but it has to be from their own heart. We can't do nation building. They have to build their own nation. But if they have the right structures in place with some help, you know,
But that has to be protected, that doesn't it, Paul? Because, you know, we see the results now of what happened when the Soviet Union failed in a vacuum without any sort of social construct or any hope or any national unification.
well, you know, the thing is that there was, during the implosion of the Soviet Union, you gotta remember, this is all happening under the corruption of the House of Cards. The House of Cards corruption, you know, that was trying to be protected so the Yeltsin crowd weren't killed. Because the people,
Right.
if they found out what the real corruption was, you know, they wouldn't have survived the next day. So they bring in Putin to kind of allow for an easy exit for that power structure, and you know, Putin was was a KGB agent and was able to soft land the corruption, but because of the position he was in, and because there wasn't a rule of law, he was able to capitalize on a new level of corruption. And now his house of cards is starting to you know, to come to fruition, and I think this is, you know, part of the dynamic. I think a lot of the Russian people realize that Putin, I mean, how do you become a billionaire without fleecing the Russian people? How do you have a yacht, you know, a multi-million-dollar yacht, unless you're fleecing the Russian people? I mean, you gotta remember, this guy has been in politics ever since the fall of the Berlin Wall. How could he be a billionaire or even a multi-millionaire with you know, with the money that supposedly he was getting officially as a government official? Well, it's obvious that he was, you know, on the take. So, you know, that he's trying, but he's protected himself with others that were also on the take. And if you take down that whole structure, and there's not a new Putin that pops up for an easy exit for him. See, I think the point I'm making is the failure with the Yeltsin crowd during the implosion of the Soviet Union, the failure was that there wasn't a real bloody purge. You know, either physically or at least judicially. You know, that Yeltsin needed to be held accountable, and that because he wasn't held accountable and there was an easy exit, it opened up for another couple decades or 3 decades of additional corruption. So we can't have a new Putin come up. We have to have some sort of judicial system in place to hold him accountable. And this may be the rumblings of what we're hearing on an international stage of war crimes. And this thing that I'm talking about in terms of some sort of judicial apparatus to be the mezzanine for Russia to move towards democracy. Because if this implodes, let's say bloody, you know, or an FSB agent? Is it FSA agent? Whatever, FSB agent, you know, pops up and, you know, becomes the new leader. Then you just have Putin version 2, and there's going to be just a new level of corruption, and the people will not have a true democracy. But if you can hold these oligarchs and Putin accountable in a judicial system, either at the international stage or within Russia, then I think you have a more chance of a true democracy that comes up, because it's predicated on the rule of law, some sort of judicial system. So maybe the policymakers at the international level, you know, is thinking this, you know, with war crimes, and that this leads to now.
But who's in charge? I think that depends on who's in charge of such an operation, and who could be, who would fill that. I don't see anybody that would do that, short of something like we had after World War II, a Nuremberg, and when you look at Japan, you know, like when you say soft land, you know, that's sort of what happened in Japan after World War II. we soft landed the emperor and the regime, pushed for reform. That worked out pretty well. I don't see any mechanism in Russia to accomplish that today.
Well, I think that through the IMF, and I'm not saying that the IMF or the World Bank is all good. It's not. There's a lot of problems.
Yeah.
I've even written about it in some of my books about the conditionality of the IMF and the World Bank. But there are institutions on the international level to help with the transition for currency stabilization and loans to build up their let's say their federal system. And the thing is that they have resources, so they have the money to pay back. It's not like, let's say, Bosnia, where there wasn't much there. They don't have real economic power, right? So Russia has economic power. It's just been mismanaged. So they can leverage that and then transition towards, a democracy. And I think the people are hungry for it. Literally, because they have literally saw their savings, that their currency has dropped more than 50%.
I just sent you a picture. If I can screen share, I can show you it right now. That I don't know if you've seen this or not, but it was a globalist idea of the one world currency change and government and all that stuff, religion and timeline. I found it in 2015.
Let's see if I can turn you into.
Just I don't have to be assistant.
I just made you host.
Co-host, I did it again. I am Supreme Overlord. Dun dun dun. Check this out.
So the ones that are listening, I can't show this to the live audience, but go ahead. If you can walk through it verbally.
It has a timeline, global governance milestones, SDR, and the transition to the global currency. And it has United Nations, United States, has got the Agenda 21 on it, United Religion Initiative, implementation of functions, SDR-based system, development of SDR clearance, the probability of war, defined optimum currency areas, and they all come together into one global currency, one global religion, one global governance. And it talks about all the different phases they go through. And right now we're in phase 3. That's the final phase. Started in 2010. It's all been planned, and it's been out there for a while. And this is by Soros' group and stuff, the globalists.
Yeah. Well, in terms of currency, the United States is rapidly approaching a digital currency. Now the question is that digital currency going to maintain its hegemonic power or not? Right. I don't know. I'm still in the camp that Soros is going to live forever, and a lot of these players that are trying to do this, they're up there in age. This crowd is the crusty old crowd. And they're, because of that, I'm not sure if they're gonna win in the long run. Digital currency per se isn't that big of a deal. There's a couple of problems to it. Assuming that there's no nefarious things going on in terms of loss of civil liberties, which there's a high probability that we would lose our civil liberties, but let's just say that we wouldn't. The problem with digital currency is that if there is a grid down situation, either because of war or because of some sort of celestial problem, celestial issue, then you lose all your money. And, and that's a huge problem. So it makes our system more fragile. So that's one problem. Now, the civil liberty problem is this, that if you are 100% in digital, you can't vote with your feet in terms of the banking system if you feel as though it's unstable. And they're preventing a bank run. So if they go negative interest rates, or let's say they're having, let's say, inflationary problems, it's going to be harder for you to move your money out of that bank and let's say transfer it into a more stable currency. They locked you in. And then if they don't like what you're saying or doing, and you're classified as a dissident, then they'll sanction you, or sanction the people that you're affiliated with. So these are some of the problems of the digital currency. But as an economic system, a pure economic system, it really doesn't matter if it's digital or coinage. The problem is that you have human actors that are involved that don't have the citizens' best interest at heart.
I agree. I'm going to post it on Twitter so it's easy to find.
Yeah, so the people that are listening on the live, just go to Chris Hunter's Twitter, and then you can see the graphic that he was showing.
And it'll be @_KRIS Hunter HUTER _ It's my Twitter. Done. Thanks for letting me talk tonight.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, no problem. And, I think that having these kind of conversations, helps. But, it's getting late and I have a busy day tomorrow. I have to start my lecturing at 8 in the morning. So, I'm gonna wrap it up here. But thank you for, joining Chris and Jack. Appreciate the conversation.
He's got a good voice. Good radio voice.
All right, Jack, you have a good radio voice.
All right, Paul, thank you very much. Much appreciated and needed, my friend.
Thank you for joining. All right, so I'm going to close it out.
My pleasure. Thank you.
All right, later.
Good night.
Good night. All right, so the ones that are, on the live feed here, thank you for participating in the chat and listening, and, we'll do this again, sometime soon. Thank you for listening and have a nice night.